Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Kathryn Garforth from the Right to Read Initiative. Today, we are having a podcast recording with Dr. Stephanie Stollar about the Right to Read Inquiry's report and looking to see what the recommendations say about pre-service training of teachers. Now, this is definitely an important concept because when you look through the report, it looks at the teacher education programs across the province of Ontario, but they are very similar really across Canada. And we've been seeing that the importance of reading instruction and how young minds become skilled readers has been really neglected. So I'm very happy to have Dr. Stephanie Stollar from the Reading Science Academy joining me today. Good afternoon. Do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me to this conversation. So I do work half-time in the Reading Science program at Mount St. Joseph University. I'm an assistant professor there. And in the other half-time, I support teachers in other ways. So you mentioned the Reading Science Academy. That's the online membership community where I support teachers to learn about the science of reading and to implement it in their schools. And I have a couple of other projects where we're supporting folks in higher education to move towards the science of reading. So our initiative is called STARS in higher ed, Stronger Together, the Alliance for Reading Science in Higher Education. One of our upcoming initiatives is hosting a summit on the science of reading in higher ed, which will be a pre-conference before the Reading League conference in October in Syracuse. So I'm trying to be supportive of teachers who are currently working in the field, who might be going back to get master's degrees, or we also have a doctoral program, but then also trying to support folks who are training pre-service teachers as well. So I've spent most of my career working with folks who are already on the job, trying to retool their profession towards more effective reading practices. And I decided not long ago that I wanted to really focus on supporting folks before they become teachers so that we get it right the first time around in their training. So that's sort of my current work, what I've been involved in.
Wonderful. Well, I think it's so hard. So many teachers, even some of the leaders in the field, or the ones that we turn to for knowledge about the science of reading and structured literacy, are teachers that haven't known it all along. They talk about their journey to discovering that, well, kids don't just learn this naturally. We don't have one area of the brain dedicated to reading. And, over the past, decades, I think it was the late 80s or the early 90s that the first brain imaging of a human reading occurred. And since then, we've had numerous different types of brain imaging strategies to really let us understand what's happening in that human brain as it's learning to read. And I think it's really important that pre-service and in-service teachers understand that, because it influences our instruction.
Yeah, you're right. We're at a time right now where some of the debates have been settled, right, with those scans of brains. So it's not just about observing what happens with different types of instruction, but observing in terms of student outcomes. But we can actually observe it in the brain, the way that the brain is changed by certain types of instruction. So I'm thinking about a study I was looking at recently where they were giving students two different kinds of approaches to learning what we might call sight words or high frequency words, irregular words that sometimes in the past we've just taught by memorization. And when they taught students by just looking at the word and having to basically memorize it, it lit up the wrong part of their brains. So I just think that's amazing. And when they taught students to learn those words by focusing on the connection between the printed letters and the sounds in the word, it actually stimulated the part of the brain that we know in literate adults or literate children even is the circuit for reading. So you can actually see the different parts of the brain that have to get connected in order for reading to happen. And if we teach in a certain way, a way that maximizes that connection between sounds and letters, it builds that circuit for students. I don't know. I think that's really exciting. I'm not a cognitive scientist. I'm not a neurologist. I don't understand, I'm sure, a lot of what's going on there. But to me, it's confirmation that there are ways to teach that are more effective and more efficient. So we should be relying on those, and we should be emphasizing that approach to teaching when we're training our pre-service educators. To me, it's not a question anymore.
No, it shouldn't be, especially when we have several studies now showing that 95% of first graders can become readers by the end of the year with the right screening and support. And I think that's an amazing fact.
Yeah.
As a parent, as a professional. And it's important that our pre-service teachers get that information.
Yes. And that's some of what I really appreciated about this report is the emphasis on prevention and early intervention and the recommendations around screening, and that pre-service teachers are aware of and using the reliable and valid indicators that can identify reading problems before it's a reading problem, right? Like that's what I'm really passionate about. That's what's really driven my work, starting as an educator who worked in reading intervention with students with disabilities, and then coming to find out you can actually prevent students from failing to learn to read by knowing if they have these early indicators or not. And if they don't, teaching them in a certain way early on when they first come to school, and then monitoring to make sure they actually achieve those milestones. To me, that's so powerful, because that's the way that we're going to create those equitable outcomes for students. That's the path to making sure every student acquires this foundational and fundamental academic skill. It's a right to read, right? As the report says, it's a fundamental right, and there's no excuse. Given what we know in the research, there's no excuse for the low outcomes that we've been getting. So I'm encouraged by the calls for prevention, for early screening, and for early action based on the screening assessments. I think that's a powerful aspect of this report.
Definitely. And I think it's important to note that, this screening isn't something that's extremely labor intensive.
Right.
And it's not just giving spreadsheets data. It's giving you information about how to best teach your class and what you can do in small group tier 2 interventions as a classroom teacher that are going to make a huge difference in these children's lives.
Yes.
And, getting them earlier, there isn't that huge gap for them to catch up.
That's right. That's right. So it's so powerful to know that there are these predictors of reading, that reading is, very complex human behavior, but there are some really fundamental and foundational components of becoming a reader that we can screen on very efficiently with reliable and valid 1 minute even indicators that tap into and really index the complexity of becoming a reader. So making sure that we're measuring early on skills like the ability to play around with sounds in spoken words at that smallest unit of speech, the phoneme, where we can't break that spoken word apart any smaller, that we can screen on that when students first come to school. And if we get an indication that they don't have enough of the ability to do something like take the word cat and segment it into the sounds k, a, t, that's an indication that the student may need some additional support to become a reader. And we don't have to wait until we find out, well, did they or did they not become a reader? We can do something about teaching phonemic awareness right away from the very beginning of when they come to school. And when we do that, it actually changes outcomes. And that's what every teacher wants, right? They want to be effective with their students. They want good outcomes with their students. They just need the guidance and the knowledge and the support to make it happen when they're teaching in schools.
Definitely. Now, the Right to Read Public Inquiry Report has 157 recommendations in it. And there are recommendations that specifically talk about ensuring pre-service preparation, addressing critical concepts. Now, these are recommendations 48 through 53, and it's really looking about how the faculties of education should embrace the science of early reading, making sure that future teachers understand some of these critical concepts. Do you mind just walking us through these concepts and how you feel they haven't necessarily been addressed and why they're so important to understand?
Yeah, so one of the areas of focus in the report is around word reading accuracy and efficiency. And so that's a topic that I'm really interested in. It's sort of where I started. My career is in measuring that word level reading, reading accurately and fluently. It's a very, I think, misunderstood concept. So one of the best ways to measure that automaticity with word recognition is what's called oral reading fluency. And that would be giving students a passage of text that represents the level of what they're expected to read at the end of their school year. And it's something they haven't seen before. Measuring for a minute the number of words they read correctly, the number of errors they make, and if they can talk about what they read, if they can recall information from the story. And we've got decades of research that confirms the relationship between words correct per minute and reading comprehension. So sometimes people think when we're measuring word reading, when we're measuring reading in a list, or we're measuring reading in text, that's just about the word recognition component. But in reality, what we're measuring there is reading comprehension. It's an index, it's an indicator of, is the student reading effortlessly enough that they can put their brain power to focusing on the meaning of what they're reading? So it's a way of getting a little picture into, is the student likely to be reading accurately and automatically enough that they can focus on what they're reading? So there's components. Let me back up. That ability to automatically recognize words is one of the most important foundational areas of what contributes to reading comprehension. So there's something called the simple view of reading, which again comes from the late 80s, was when they first developed this theory about what are the capacities or competencies that students have to have for reading comprehension to be in place. And one of them is word recognition. So this effortless lifting or uploading the print into spoken language. And so the report is accurately representing the importance of that skill area. I think that's so essential. So to me, this oral reading fluency is like the tipping point. So there are skills that students have to acquire so that they can read words effortlessly. And then once they can read text accurately and fluently, then we're into being able to look at their ability in the area of language comprehension. So they have to be oh, go ahead.
I was just hoping to interrupt because you're talking about oral reading fluency, which is an excellent measure. But a lot of the schools are still using running records.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind taking a moment to discuss the difference between an oral reading fluency measure and a running record?
Yeah, sure. So running records tend to have teachers analyzing the errors that students make. They're typically untimed. The level of the text that students read during a running record is not quite as controlled as it would be in an oral reading fluency assessment, or the way that it's leveled, quote unquote, has to do more with the vocabulary that's in the passage. And what teachers are listening for primarily are the mistakes that students are making and the types of mistakes. So a running record is really tied to that discredited approach to reading instruction called 3Qing, where teachers are trying to uncover the sort of balance between students' approach to solving words, being the meaning of the word in context, the syntax, the sequence of words, and the visual cues. And so a running record is really tied to that approach, that 3Qing or MSV approach that hasn't held up to credible research. It really doesn't line up with what you were saying about what's happening in the brains when we scan students who are literate. And so a running record is not really focused in the way that oral reading fluency is on the automaticity of reading and the connection between automatic word recognition and reading comprehension. It's, to me, the two assessments are focused on two different ideas about how reading happens and two different approaches to instruction. So I don't know if that helps with
definitely
clarifying.
Important to note that when we're doing that oral reading fluency, the reason why it's helping us understand their comprehension is because when a student has that automatic recognition of a word, they've connected the printed word with the spoken word and the meaning of that word to get it to identify it within a fraction of a second. That is going to mean that they're going to have better access to comprehension. And when we're looking at comprehension, one of the things that we need to consider is working memory. And that's a memory that we use while we're working with and dealing with information. It has a quick refresh and a limited capacity. So if you're seeing that a student is only reading a few words or not very fluent in their reading, that's going to be taxing on their working memory, which will in turn affect their ability to understand what they're reading.
That's right. That's exactly right. And it impacts their ability to understand what they're reading. It impacts their ability to gain new information. If they are not automatic with word recognition, they miss out on learning through the text and being able to discuss the text with their classmates. They miss out on the opportunity to gain new vocabulary. The best way to get new content knowledge and to gain new word meanings is by reading. And so if their reading is clunky, if it's slow, if it's labored, it's not something they're going to choose to do. It's not something that they're going to spend time doing. They're going to miss out on all of those other opportunities that come with having automaticity of word recognition. So that comprehension is the ultimate goal that we're going for. I think this is one of the misunderstandings that happens when people start talking about the science of reading or start looking at an evidence-based approach to reading instruction. They think that the focus on word recognition takes away from reading comprehension. You've had that same experience, same conversations with people. I think that's a common misunderstanding, especially when we get into second, third, fourth grade and beyond, where the grade level standards are about reading comprehension. Sometimes teachers misunderstand and think, if the goal is reading comprehension, then we should be focusing our instruction on reading comprehension. And we haven't sufficiently supported them to understand there's a path to get to reading comprehension. There are these essential component skills that are the building blocks that get us to reading comprehension. So we have to take the time to build that sequence of skills. explicitly and systematically for the purpose of reading comprehension. It's not some different goal. It's not, decoding instruction or phonics instruction as an isolated skill. That's not the goal. It's that instant word recognition in service of accessing the language, the lifting the print into spoken language so we can get to comprehension.
And that's what I feel is really important, to make sure that those pre-service teachers understand. You have to remember, at least in Canada, a lot of the pre-service training programs are 1 year post-bachelorette programs.
Mm-hmm.
So educators are coming into their pre-service training with a variety of backgrounds and a variety of expertise. Now, they need to have 2 English courses or 2 French, whichever language they're going for. And when we look at university English courses, typically they're focused on composition, poetry, and literature. And that's not going to give these teachers the understanding of the written language that you may get from a linguistics course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's going to be a big switch for folks, right? And an important switch, an important change of focus. And that's what really comes out in this report. I think that the emphasis on that training being provided to people in their pre-service. Now, there's going to be, just like there is in the United States, a period of transition where the people who are the instructors in those training programs have to get their knowledge, up to speed as well. So, that's one of the things that I'm really interested in, is creating the infrastructure for people to access that, for them to change, to enhance their knowledge. I have to say it that way, so that they have an understanding. You can't teach what you don't know. You can't teach it to others. And so it's fantastic that this report has been able to shine a light on these important features that pre-service teachers need. But what's going to happen to get their instructors up to speed? That's an important question that I'm not sure exactly what the specific answers are in Canada. I know in the US, there's just been a groundswell of interest from the people who are in these roles. They are recognizing that the way they've been training teachers hasn't been effective. They hear from the people that they train once they get out into the field that they weren't prepared well to teach reading. And they're sort of coming to a realization that there's more to teaching reading than what they themselves were trained in. And they're taking it upon themselves to educate themselves, to learn, to update their own knowledge, and then to change their coursework. And I applaud those folks. That's amazing to me, because that's so self-directed, and it's essential for that to happen. But there also needs to be, a real systematic effort. I think that was one of the, I don't know if system or systematic is the term that's used in this report, but I appreciated that this can't just happen teacher by teacher. We need both the ground swell, the from the ground up, and there needs to be an infrastructure. There needs to be supports made available to people who are already working in roles as professors, as adjuncts, as instructors. Somehow those folks need to be brought up to speed in all of the recommendations of this report, and what that means for their coursework changing. That's a very challenging endeavor, especially when we have these, sort of different views about how reading develops or how reading should be taught. People who are currently working as professors have invested their careers, perhaps, in the balanced literacy or whole language approach, in a constructivist approach to reading. That's all they've known. That's what they perhaps have believed all of their career, that it might be what they have done research in. And now they're being told that that's not sufficient and they need to learn something new. That can be really threatening. It can be challenging. It can be frightening and scary. And if there isn't a space created for recognizing all of those emotions that those folks are going to bring to this, I think there's a chance that people will just dig their heels in and they won't be open to learning something new. And that's not going to serve our students. So I'm really looking. I don't have the answers. I'm really interested. I'm really curious. I'm listening to people who are in these roles and trying to discover what are the mechanisms for making this change. How do we get these university professors interested and curious and willing? And then what are the structures to support them to make this massive change in their thinking and in their practice? So, I don't know if you've heard other.
I feel it very similar thoughts with you, because we're asking these people to go in a very vulnerable position.
Yes.
And that takes a huge amount of courage.
Yes.
And understanding. And, it's understandable that it is hard to do it. But we don't have time to wait for them to come across that one student that makes the difference. Not everybody has children anymore, and not everybody has a dyslexic child. And right. So many teachers that have made the change are because, I'm a teacher, my child's dyslexic, and I couldn't teach them how to read. I had to look further.
It's a very common story.
Right. Or yeah. I had this one student and I just didn't understand, or using those predictable texts, they were using them but they couldn't read.
Yeah.
They could when I gave them this book. And just understanding that, all of our children come with different backgrounds into the school system. I have 3 children. I have 2 that have struggled and 1 that's reading before kindergarten. So, there is that spectrum, and you can be biased by the spectrum or the aspect of the spectrum, or Nancy Young's ladder of reading and writing, where the students fall on that. And if you're only having that personal connection with students on the higher end of the ladder,
mm-hmm.
and you're like, oh, well, they'll just get it later. It's natural to learn how to read, in grade 3 or grade 4, where they just need to wait a little bit. They need to mature. That's not how it works. But if that's what they believed and that's what they were taught,
right,
and that's what we're dealing with. And also, a lot of the professionals in the field are individuals that learned how to read easily, and they don't remember learning how to read. So they may not remember getting that direct systematic instruction. If they did, they may have just figured it out based on what they were exposed to, and then figured it out the rest of the way. So it's hard when you don't have that personal connection or the personal experience of understanding the things along the way. And I think one of the issues that I see occurring is there's so many great books and social media groups and book studies that are occurring, but a lot of them are, again, at that level that's just one step above where people are currently at. And it just makes them dig their heels in even more, because there's so much jargon and, orthographic mapping, visual word form area, morphology, structured word inquiry. All of these things are asking a lot of learning, and teachers are maxed out. So we need to make sure that this occurs in the pre-service stages, and that faculties of education are, being asked by the schools that are getting their teachers, well, can you please have them so they know this coming in?
Right.
I know I've been speaking with some teachers, and they get pre-service teachers as student teachers in their classrooms, and they have 2 universities that send them students. And everybody's wanting to go get students from this one university because they're that much more advanced in their understanding and how students learn how to read. And that's another equity issue that we're seeing.
Right. So I think there's something in what you're saying that is a strategy of developing a partnership. So where there's recognition, and right now it would be the willing people who are willing and interested in learning, but when they can partner, the school system and the university system, maybe it's a place where pre-service teachers are getting some of their practical experience, or maybe it's just a place that hires out of that university where there's some kind of an existing relationship. I think that kind of collaboration can be really powerful because both of those entities are invested in student outcomes. That's the focus and the goal. And both of them need to increase their knowledge about effective reading instruction. They need to become learners, both of them. Teachers are used to being experts. University professors are used to being experts. And we're asking people to take on that position of being a learner. And if you can do that in collaboration together, I think it takes away some of that, vulnerability and some of the potentially threatening nature of it, that we're in this together for the benefit of our students. And I think that has a lot of potential for being one of those mechanisms to make this massive shift and change a reality. So we have to be looking for those opportunities, creating those opportunities. That's kind of the idea behind this summit that we're having in October, just getting some university professors in the same room together. And Canadian professors and instructors are welcome to come as well to Syracuse, New York, and learn from each other, right? Like, not everyone has to reinvent the wheel as individuals. So I'm envisioning this group of professors really sharing ideas, sharing resources, and understanding that they're not having to go through this alone, that there's a community there, is kind of the idea of what I'm envisioning and hoping for. Because otherwise, these kinds of recommendations in the report can just be, well, that's nice, but how am I supposed to accomplish that, right? And so if we can put people together and leverage the things that others have found to be effective, what was helpful in their university, if we can share the coursework, the textbooks that people are using in pre-service, so it takes a little bit of the burden off for the next person, for the new professor who's trying to make this shift. So those are my hopeful and optimistic ideas, I guess.
Well, and when you think about it, other professions do this. Pre-med or pre-law or accountants, they have to learn the basics. And with slight variation in textbooks, you're going to get the same thing coast to coast, country to country, continent to continent. These are, human anatomy doesn't change based on where you go to school. Right. Basic mathematical calculations aren't going to change. These are standards that we need to understand, just like the 5 pillars of reading or the 5 keys of reading. Phonological awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. Those are the standards that everybody needs to understand, and the relationship to them, how they can make it so they are not separate aspects of the program. There's been lot of conversation about the importance of linking phonological awareness and phonemic awareness activities to actually using the letters with the phonics instruction. and teachers understanding that and why that is important. So they don't just go to Teachers Pay Teachers and, download whatever they can. We need to have that standard, and even standard of resources that teachers can access and not have to purchase or create. Because, even things like the heart words, I really like the heart words approach to teaching those high frequency, phonetically irregular words so that students learn how to recognize the letters that are phonetic and understand the letters that are not. And I think that's very similar to that study that you were mentioning earlier.
That's right. Yeah.
So these are resources that are available, and we don't need Twitter or TikTok to be the ones that are putting them out there so that teachers have access to them.
Yeah. Yeah. We have to make that available to every teacher during their training, and to be able to get to that place, we have to find those ways to support the university professors to make that shift. So I know I hear people talking about, well, to teach those 5 essential skills that you were mentioning, how do I, in the limited time that I have with my pre-service teachers, maybe it's one course, how do I communicate all of that information to them? So that's a real challenge, to take the complexity of those 5 essential skills. And you were mentioning the connections among them, right? So you have to understand what are the 5, but then how do they work in a reciprocal way with each other to create that reading network? So how do you communicate that if you have 1 or 2 courses? How do you communicate that complexity in a way that teachers can take it and actually implement it with their students in schools in that very, very limited time? So we have to get much more refined in our approaches to that teacher training. And we probably also need to think about it beyond just that coursework, right? So you mentioned other professions, and I think there's some modeling that we can do in the way of thinking about apprenticeship, right? Like, we can't think about the teacher training as this single event. You mentioned the year after the undergraduate degree. That can't be it. Like, that can't be all that teachers get. So the on-the-job training, which I know we'll talk about at a later time, but this idea of mentorship and apprenticeship early on in your career, that has to be a part of this transition. I think that is necessitated by this commission's report, that it can't just be a one-shot deal. It can't just come through the coursework. It has to come through the coursework, and that has to be systematized. But in addition to that, the first several years that teachers are working has to be part of the solution as well. And then what happens in professional development while they're on the job is also critically important. The renewal of your teaching credentials over time, over the course of your career, all of that entire professional learning system has to get aligned to what we now know in the reading research. So it's a massive undertaking, but the more people are having these kinds of conversations, the more we will discover and create the solutions to make it happen.
Well, and I think it's almost like we need the equivalent of an MCAT or something for pre-service teachers to take to get into the program, so that we can have an established baseline of knowledge that we're expecting, because
Yes.
there's only so much that you can cover in those 1 or 2 literacy courses. So making sure that before pre-service teachers come into their training program, they have a basic knowledge about the structure of the language, and even numerous math concepts. I remember when I did my teacher education program, my first degree was in computer science, and I didn't have a basic first year math course, but I had 4th year math courses, and I had 3rd year math courses, and I had 2nd year math courses, but they weren't counting.
Huh.
And so I think that, that entrance test, understanding the basic foundational concepts related to reading, not necessarily reading, but understanding word structure, understanding what morphemes are, understanding what phonemes are.
Right.
Just the basics, so that everybody can start from a common starting ground, because it's the same thing that we have when you have kids enter kindergarten, with everybody coming in with a different aspect of knowledge. I'm pretty sure university professors, when they're teaching so many students, don't have the time to screen their students and do small group instruction in that, 3 hours a week they have with their students?
Usually not.
Yeah, it's not very realistic in that situation to have that availability. So if we have this knowledge for them, and saying, look, they understand this because they had to.
Yeah.
Then I think everybody's going to be better off.
Yeah. So you're talking about, entrance into the teacher preparation. I think there's also potential for assessing those teacher candidates as they exit their teacher training before they are, entering the profession. And I think the standards that come from the International Dyslexia Association give us really solid frameworks for what teachers need to know and what they need to be able to do. It's an excellent starting place, the knowledge and practice standards from IDA. I don't know how those have translated in Canada, if those are familiar to people, but I know in our teacher training program, that's the backbone. We follow those knowledge and practice standards. That's what we build all of our coursework around. They're fairly comprehensive, and they make it concrete. So it's not this abstract, buzzword term, science of reading, but there's actually very observable and measurable skills and behaviors that we need to provide the experiences and the learning to our teacher candidates, so that they can they can leave the training with us with this set of knowledge and with this set of skills. And so I think having that makes it a much more concrete, and when it's concrete, it's much more likely to actually be implemented.
Well, and something that we haven't discussed yet is the practicum placements of these teachers, where they get that hands-on experience of teaching before they come fully accredited teachers. There are situations where students may be getting, the training in the science of reading, but then be placed with a teacher that doesn't align their practices with it and say, oh, forget that, this is what we do. And I think we need to be critical of, well, not critical, but be selective in our choosing of these teachers and these mentors for these pre-service teachers, so that they can see what a science of reading classroom looks like, because there are several amazing ones out there.
Yeah, that's a real challenge for the universities. And that's where I was suggesting this idea of this collaboration, right? Like I've seen this happen where maybe the university training program goes first, right? Like they're the ones to kind of get on board with evidence-based reading instruction first. And they're training their teacher candidates to do really effective instruction with students. But they're putting them, as you're saying, for their clinical experiences into perhaps balanced literacy classrooms. And I've seen it happen where that supervising teacher, that mentor teacher, gets their eyes, opened to seeing what this young teacher in training is able to do with the students when they observe the way that teacher candidate is working with the children and the results and outcomes that they're getting. That can sometimes make that supervising teacher say, wait a minute, what's going on there? I'm struggling with that student. I'm having a difficult time getting them to learn this skill. And this, 19 or 20-year-old is able to do something that is new to me, that it's not familiar to me. That can be a great way to encourage and grow that kind of collaboration. It takes teachers being professional, right? And being willing to say, maybe I don't know it all. Maybe if I'm not effective with a student, maybe there's something for me to learn. Maybe there's somebody who can help me learn that. Maybe that somebody is at the university, right? Like that two-way partnership, I think is really important to build, because if it's just the training program, once that young, new novice teacher gets into the school system, they're just going to model what they see happening around them. They're not going to be the one to say, oh, but wait a minute, there's research on this. And, that's asking too much of those folks, those new teachers. So we have to, but where else are we going to put them, right? Like if that's your local community around the university, where else are you going to place them? If there isn't a school that's already increased the effectiveness of their reading instruction, the university is going to have to do that outreach to create that relationship with the administrators, with the teachers in that school, to do that kind of joint learning so that there can be a field placement that actually allows those teacher candidates to practice what they've learned. It's really, really important. And it's not going to just materialize out of thin air. So
even if we could create a program, or not a program, some sort of in-service training that teachers have to complete before getting their pre-service teacher for that practical placement, so that they can be updated on, okay, look, this is what this pre-service teacher is coming to you with. Right. We want you to nurture and facilitate this. This is the overview. If you're wanting more information, go here.
Right. But developing those opportunities, where do they go? Like, what is that they can tap into? Right. Like, that whole system, I think, has to get created. And, that's what many people are trying to do right now. And that's the idea behind getting the university folks together, creating those opportunities. The Reading League is involved in a virtual community of practice that they've just created for university professors. So, I've been talking about this physically getting together before the conference in October, but they're creating a monthly opportunity for university professors to virtually connect. And actually, we just had the first meeting last Friday, and there were 2 professors from Canada, I'm happy to report, that were already showing up in that community of practice. So, there's lots of excitement and energy, like I said, among individuals, but we've got to get it systematized somehow, because it can't be, as you said, left to chance that this just happens to be the local teacher training program that you have chosen to go to. It has to really become systematized.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Stollar. I look forward to our conversation next week, where we're going to be focusing on in-service training to help all those teachers that haven't had this in their training.
Yes.
And it's a really important topic, because realistically, even if all the teacher education programs were changed today, it would take about 30 years for all the in-service teachers to have that training. I mean, I've been speaking to teachers that have been teaching for 40 years, and they're just starting to learn about, the science of reading and these best practices. And they're making those changes, even though they only have 1 or 2 years left in their career.
Those people are rock stars, aren't they? Like, it's
definitely
so inspirational to get to interact with people who they're not at the end, right? Like, they don't see it as the end. They're truly lifelong learners. I just, hats off to those folks.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we will talk to you again next week.
All right. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.